What is up, everybody? A little over 24 hours until the initial Bills 53-man roster will be official. This is Shout of Buffalo Bills Football Podcast, brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. Right now, you can pair your favorite craft beer with your favorite craft burger at Tops. Tops has the perfect burger and beer pairing guide over at topsmarkets.com/burgers and beer. Whether you're soaking up the final days of summer or grilling out before the football game, Tops has something for everyone. Check these out. Cobb Salad Burger pairs well with a wheat beer. The Monster Munster Burger pairs well with the Belgian Pale Ale. How about the Pizza Turkey Burger with a Amber Ale, or maybe even the Blue Chipotle Burger, Blue Cheese Chipotle Burger with a Brown Ale? Anything your heart desires, you can find the combinations over at topsmarkets.com/burgers and beer. What is up, Ryan Talbot?
Hey, not too much. Waiting for these roster cuts to be announced and looking into your 53-man roster projection, Matt, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yes, sir. Dropped that bad boy last night. The Shout Bills insiders started giving some of their reaction to how I had this thing go. And I really went with the approach of thinking about how Brandon Beane is going to try to whittle down this roster. Because, I think the best place to start is like the three toughest cuts for me, in this thing. And I'll bring it up here right now. First and foremost, Jamarcus Ingram. To me, he was the 54th player on the roster. He was the last cut that I had. And actually, funny enough, we were talking about it beforehand, and I had him making the roster, but that's because I didn't put the tight end section in. So I had to really do the work and figure out, all right, what are the last three cuts going to be? Just a little bit of an error. Glad we caught that before it went to publish. But Jamarcus Ingram, Ryan, I went back and watched, and we're also going to bake in a little bit into this conversation some of the takeaways from watching that Bears-Bills game back. And Jamarcus Ingram was one of the best players on the field. Now, a lot of his work came against the third team, and I think you have to bake that into it. He's sitting behind Saran Neal and Taron Johnson in that slot cornerback, played a lot of it, mixed in some boundary corner as well. When they cut him, another team is going to pick him up. This is a second-year undrafted guy. He is not going to clear waivers. He's the type of talent, to me, reminds me a little bit of Nick McLeod last year. Obviously, the Giants picked him up. That wouldn't surprise me if they went in that direction. But I thought, to me, Jamarcus Ingram was the toughest cut of the ones that I had to make.
Yeah, Ingram played great in that last preseason game, Matt. He had a strong summer. He's someone that this team has really developed over the past 2 years. And, you said it. There's a premium on certain positions in this league, and cornerback is one of them. Teams are always looking for cornerback upgrades. And with the film that Ingram's put out on both in the regular season last year when he was called into action in a game, when he's had to play in these preseason games, I think he's looked very good. He's looked the part for this team. So there's going to be a lot of interest. There's a lot of scouts at all of these preseason games, and I guarantee you they left the final preseason game saying that Jamarcus Ingram, he's probably teetering on the border of won't he make this roster, and if he doesn't, we should put in a claim for him. He was that good. I agree with you there in terms of him being the toughest cut.
The next guy is Alec Anderson, and he's somebody that we talked a little bit about while I was kind of going through the process of putting this together. Somebody that we both are pretty high on. We both think has a legitimate shot to make this roster. And again, I had him in the Bills keeping 10 offensive linemen. What allowed me to kind of go in a different direction and put him in that cut list is the thing with him is the versatility, right? He could play all five spots, but it wasn't great at right tackle when they did put him back out there, which I thought was interesting because he came in as a tackle, Ryan, and it was really good on the interior, but the same problem as Ingram. Most of his reps on the interior were coming against third team defensive players, and I just don't know if that's going to be enough to make the cut. If he ends up being one of the offensive linemen the Bills keep, it won't surprise me, but I'm just trying to think of this through a deductive process like Brandon Beane going through it. What's more important to him? To me, it came down to like an Alec Anderson versus a Cam Lewis, who ends up being kind of like a quasi fifth safety, but he can play cornerback. He can play in the slot. If you need him, he can play on the boundary. I just thought that versatility and his importance on special teams was a little bit more important. And I think that the Bills are probably going to do a little bit more work on the offensive line once the cuts happen, because you're going to see players across the league flood the free agent market, go on waivers, all those kinds of things. You might have the opportunity to add some players that way.
And that's certainly fair. And you're already seeing certain teams trading for offensive linemen. The Patriots making trades for 2 offensive linemen yesterday alone. So there could be trades that happen. There's going to be cuts that happen across the league. One of these linemen could make the roster and then get cut for one of those players that suddenly find themselves out there on the free agent market, or having to go through the claims process. But Alec Anderson's interesting. He's 23 years old. He was brought in as a UDFA last year. Same with Ryan Vandemark in terms of those younger offensive linemen that they have. He started as a tackle, like you said, but this year he got some reps at center. He can play at guard. He did pretty well in the interior, but when you put him back out where, what was supposed to be his top position, I guess, he struggled, and he struggled quite a bit in that matchup. And maybe it's just too much on his plate this year after saying, hey, learn how to play center, learn how to play guard. Oh, by the way, we're going to throw you back out there at tackle. Versatility is great. This team values versatility, but like you said, there's versatile players at other positions too, like your Cam Lewis, where you have to weigh the pros and cons of, okay, he's my top guy, not Saran Neal, in my opinion. If something were to happen to Taron Johnson, he would be the guy that would step into that spot. He's a 5th safety. He's a guy that can also play on the outside. So where are you more likely going to need a player? I think the Bills are pretty talented on the interior of their line, so that also kind of takes a little bit away from Alec Anderson and maybe the case for keeping him.
Pops Mafia Harold over on YouTube, one of our OGs, asked 10 O-line or 9 O-line. I ended up going with 9, and David Questenberry was one of them. And I want to get into the reasoning behind this. I actually think there's a really good chance that Questenberry is not on this roster, active roster, by the first game. But I do think with their situation at tackle right now, at the very least, what you're getting with him. And obviously it hasn't been very good. I mean, I texted you about that one play watching back the game. It was Anderson at right tackle and Questenberry at left tackle. And they both just almost got Kyle Allen killed in the strip sack. That ended up being the fumble. And was it a turnover? I can't remember.
Yes,
but
they lost.
Yes, it was a turnover. Joshua Price says Questenberry is a liability. And I do agree with that. But I also don't know if you're ready to vault like an Alec Anderson or a Richard Garage into that mix. That's why I think he makes the roster as that 4th tackle to start, and then they look to improve on that spot. Alec Anderson would have been my 10th, but I decided to go and keep in other areas. We'll get into some of that in a moment. But your thoughts on Questenberry, Ryan?
Yeah, Questenberry has some versatility as well, can play on the inside at guard, but in terms of what he can do, I think the Bills are still a little uneasy about what if something were to happen to Spencer Brown. Ryan Vandemark has been outstanding at left tackle this summer when he's had the reps there. Not as consistent at right tackle, where Questenberry is a little bit more at home in that spot. So I think in your initial roster, you want to have someone that you're somewhat comfortable with. If a better option comes along, then by all means you pursue it. I'm as high on Richard Garage and his development as anyone, but I think he needs more time, more reps to get acclimated, to get used to being an every down type of player or a key reserve type player. And maybe that happens next year. Maybe he gets to spend the entire offseason on the Bills, or I'm sorry, the entire regular season on the Bills practice squad. So he's just not quite ready yet. Alec Anderson, I like him, but we just mentioned his struggles at tackle. So someone needs to be there behind Spencer Brown. And right now, Questenberry is your best option, in my opinion.
So I have obviously Connor McGovern making the 53-man roster, but I think this is where, like you can read on the headline. And if you want to read the entire 53-man roster projection, you can head over to NewYorkUpstate.com or Syracuse.com. It is the first story on the Bills tab right now. I went with a little roster gymnastics, Ryan, right? Like you've seen this a couple years ago from Brandon Beane when, they got a couple guys banged up as you kind of inch closer to this cutdown day, but you don't want to outright release them or waive them and chance it not working out. So what'll end up happening, like in 2020, I think, at least in one case, you had Andre Roberts and Dean Marlowe who were surprise cuts everybody was talking about in 2020, if you remember, like who's going to return kicks for this team all of a sudden. But they just hung out in the parking lot, signed back the next day after they did some moves. Isaiah Hodgins went on IR, and I believe John Feliciano also. So I think I have Kyle Allen getting cut and Matt Barkley. I think Barkley could end up starting the season on injured reserve, depending on how bad that elbow is. But Kyle Allen's a guy, like, he signed for the veteran minimum. After the preseason that he just had, I don't know if anybody's going to be clamoring to sign him. He's a vested veteran, so he can make the decision with where and who he signs with. So I think you cut him, you take the one quarterback in, and then once you make some corresponding moves, McGovern, if he's going to be out a couple weeks or however that ends up looking like, you stash him on IR, you bring Kyle Allen right back to the practice squad. And I'm not saying that that's definitely the move. Like if maybe they cut Kyle Allen, Ryan, and they go and try to find another backup quarterback. One name that has been mentioned several times in the subtext. And by the way, if you want to join the Shout Insider subtext group, 716-528-6727. Send us a text for a 2-week trial. I still might even throw you a month if you DM me or email me for free. Why not? I feel like it's always the giving season as football season approaches. Will Grier, and we could talk about him a little bit, potentially getting cut by the Cowboys here over the next 24 hours. I'm not a huge fan of the move, only because this is a guy with very limited experience in the NFL. He's only started 2 games, 2019 with the Carolina Panthers. And I don't even know what you think you're getting. I mean, he's been all right in the preseason, I guess. But he'd have to come in here and completely start at scratch like Kyle Allen did back in April when he signed with the Bills. So he's already 4 months behind. I don't know if the player is that exciting for me to kind of start this whole process over again.
No, I agree with that. And I think the final performance of a certain player will go a long way in terms of fans wanting someone on the roster. And he was outstanding in Dallas's final preseason game. He had Dak Prescott calling the plays for him. There's limited mobility there. He's not quite as much of a skill match in terms of if you want someone that's similar to Josh Allen. And obviously they didn't go that route with Kyle Allen. He has some mobility, doesn't have the same type of arm. But, you know, with the whole fact that they were in on Trey Lance is mobile. Trey Lance has a big arm. Maybe that's the path that they would rather go with, or someone that has at least a little bit more mobility. So I get the discussion on it. I think that the Bills could be in play to add another quarterback to the mix here. But, you know, just like any other team in this league, Matt, if your starter goes down 99 out of 100 times, your season's pretty much over, regardless of who your backup is. So one of my favorite things with your 53-man roster projection was going with just one quarterback. It's what the Dallas Cowboys did last year. Eventually, they did have to promote both of their practice squad QBs to the 53-man roster. But it's smart. It's smart roster gymnastics. It opens up 2 other spots that you might not have at the beginning of the year. It allows you to keep, you know, some players that you were right on the fence about and gives them a chance to kind of prove themselves early on in the season.
If you want to prove yourself to your family and friends when you're hosting a big get-together, get over to Tops World of Burgers. It is yours to explore, and it's the best burger deals in town. With over 30 ready-to-grill burgers, Tops is the place to pick out the juiciest, most delicious burgers in town. From beef and jerky to chicken and veggie, you'll find something for everyone. Taste the flavors of the world with unique toppings and twists on the classic burger. Tops World of Burgers, yours to explore. All right, Ryan, next up, I want to dip into the wide receiver waters here a little bit because I have the Bills. What I think I started with back in when training camp opened to where I am today, not much has changed despite the emergence of Andy Isabella. And listen, I had like I mentioned, I forgot the tight end. So I did try to find a way for Isabella onto the 53 just because I think it's interesting. And listen, if Khalil Shakir is really banged up and those ribs are a bigger issue than maybe it might seem right now, maybe you stack him. You know, Andy Isabella's a vested veteran. Maybe you say, hey, we're going to cut you. We're going to put Shakir on that IR. You bring him back into the mix and see if that maybe works its way out. But listen, with Hardy returning punts, and I think Hardy expected to have a pretty decent role in this offense, I just don't see the path if they do keep Isabella to a jersey on Sundays and Mondays. Like, I don't think that he can get there. So I think it's a situation where, all right, you've struggled. You're really happy with this spot. Things have gone really well. Why don't we cut you? If you don't have a great opportunity elsewhere, why don't you come back to the practice squad? And if somebody gets banged up, it could be a situation where you get an opportunity to play for a really good team. But I just think at this stage, as good as Isabella has been for the most part in the summer, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
And I get that. And I had Isabella on my last 53-man roster projection. I'm really keeping a close eye on wide receiver, Matt, because I think that patience and things like that with teams across the league, it's different for in every case. But there was a 6th-round wide receiver from last year's draft that was released yesterday. And I just tried pulling it up on my phone. I can't remember if I took a screenshot of it or not. Kind of like, well, maybe Shakir's not 100% safe. I do think that they really like Khalil Shakir for the record, but teams aren't going to keep guys around just because they were a draft pick a year ago or 2 years ago. You saw the Browns give up on a day 2 pick from 2020 draft, and he had speed for days, but he didn't really play wide receiver. So there is a turning of the page at some point where teams aren't going to have the patience or maybe put in as much time to develop these players if there's a better option out there. And I'm not saying Isabella is a better option than Khalil Shakir, but I think maybe Justin Shorter is someone we have to talk more about too, where, I don't think he did anything spectacular in the final preseason game to stand out. I know Isabella didn't either. He had the fumble. He only had, I think, 2 catches for 2 yards. Shorter made a few plays in that second preseason game, but it was against, second, third team type players. So if you're going to really weigh it out, okay, well, who's going to help us now? Who's going to help us more long-term? Shorter has the look of an NFL wide receiver, but he is limited athletically. He is not a special type of athlete, where Isabella certainly has the speed. I'm not saying that he's fills in like all the boxes either for a special type of athlete, but there's at least one attribute that stands off the chart. So that's maybe the most interesting position, along with the defensive end room, in terms of what the Bills end up doing.
Yeah, and I wonder how much, though, Adam Henry is going to be a Justin Shorter guy in the room, right? Like, you just see the work that they've kind of put in this summer together, just the chats off to the side, the fact that Henry was in the mix when they drafted Justin Shorter. He was also in the mix when they signed Andy Isabella. So there's definitely going to be possibly a conversation to be had there. But I just think if you're thinking about, like, what's the path to getting a guy a jersey, Shorter has the easier path because he plays special teams. I think there's some potential real juice there as a gunner. And maybe you have Matt Smiley coming into these decision-making meetings and pounding the table for Shorter on his end, which gives him a kind of another layer and why he was somebody that I felt comfortable with going with. At tight end, I had the Bills going with Quentin Morris. I know that there's been mixed reviews of his preseason / training camp. I don't know, Ryan. Like, there's nothing to me that's been that bad that, would take away from some of the high moments that I feel like he's had. And if you want to talk about from a pass catching perspective, the former wide receiver, to me, fits in really nicely. He's a staple on special teams for them. I consider Quentin Morris pretty much a lock.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that obviously the touchdown grab in the final preseason game was nice, but he had a great training camp in terms of making spectacular grabs quite a few days, standing out there on the field. It's just, he was buried a little bit in terms of the attention because of how great Dalton Kincaid was, some of the other players that stepped up in these practices. But Quentin Morris was a regular in terms of making those great plays on a semi-daily basis during the summer. So I see no reason to move on from him. You want to have 3 tight ends on this roster, considering how much 12 personnel they could run if you're going to spell either of these receivers in game, if he's active, that is. Quentin Morris can step in and help in that regard. And then if one of them get injured for any span of time, you have someone that knows the playbook, has some of that athleticism, and he can come in and contribute as well.
You see what I'm drinking out of here today, Ryan?
Oh, yeah.
We got the AG1 water bottle. I don't know if you guys have listened here on YouTube, which I think we're cruising now over 150, maybe close to 200. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. AG1, we do a lot of reads. We have a lot of sponsors, great partners. I got to tell you guys, I have absolutely fallen in love with the product, AG1. I take it every morning. It is delicious. I feel like an energy boost. I feel healthier. I feel like my gut health is at an all-time high. And right now, for the video component, because these reads have been running on our audio side, you can go to drinkag1.com /shout, and you will get a deal on a 1-year supply of AG1. And I'm telling you right now, I don't know how long they're going to be sponsoring us and us doing these reads. I'm a customer for life, Ryan. I mean, we've been doing it for a little over a month and a half, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm on my second week here in Arizona, and I brought those travel packets with me so I could still do this every morning when I first get up. So I have them right over on my temporary nightstand over there. I have the bottle out in the kitchen. So every morning, that's how I start my day as well. It's really good stuff. Tons of vitamins and nutrients and things that are good for you in AG1.
Roy's got some jokes in the comments saying it's an infomercial time. This is actually not one that we had to put in. I am interjecting it because, man, I just loved it so much. Give AG1 a try. My brother-in-law, actually, or my cousin-in-law, he texted me about when the promo code was going to go live, and I sent it over to him, and he's loving it too now. So we're turning into an AG1 family. All right, let's get to defensive line here. We got to move this thing along. I have the Bills keeping 10, putting Von Miller on the PUP list, Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, Boogie Basham, and AJ Epinesa, Ed Oliver, Kingsley Jonathan was my surprise keep, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, Jordan Phillips, and Poona Ford. I had the Bills cutting Shaq Lawson, and it wasn't because Shaq Lawson shouldn't make this team. Like, I actually think I would make the argument that he should. I think he's good enough. I think he's important to what they do. But I also think that he's a process culture guy. Like, I think after all of his, stops around the league when he left Buffalo, like, he really values his experience here. And because of that, I think you can work with him and say, listen, we don't know how this thing's going to look. Maybe they want to get a look in season at AJ Epinesa and Boogie Basham and make a informed decision on them that could happen maybe before the trade deadline. Everybody's asking about, is one of these guys going to be traded? Well, why not just have them kind of audition over the first couple weeks of the season? I mean, you're not in a super rush. You have 6 weeks to figure it out, and then make a deal if you'd like to. And I think Shaq, in a pinch, like if you even want him in the Jets game and you want to sit AJ or Boogie down for that game because it's an important game, you can elevate him off the practice squad if he's willing to do it. I think there's a lot that goes into this decision, and it only works with a guy that's willing to kind of play ball, that values where he's at and the team, the organization.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really interesting move. I did not have Kingsley Jonathan on my final 53-man roster, but I've been very high on him. I like his game. I thought he really stepped up in the 2 final preseason games this summer, made his case. And listen, last year, he made some plays in the summer as well, but I don't think he was that well established. And he was one of the players that was claimed off of waivers by the Chicago Bears. So if the Bills expose him to waivers again, there's a good chance that another team signs a Kingsley Jonathan. If you're that invested in his development, he's someone that you kind of bring onto this 53-man roster. You figure out a way to get him on there. I thought they had a few young guys that really stepped up in the preseason. Jonathan, I thought Cameron Klein was an interesting player this summer, late into the preseason as well. I think he might end up being a practice squad type of guy if he can get through waivers, but sometimes you do have to lean with the youth over these veteran players, as good as Shaq Lawson was last year. Once Von Miller went down, I get your thinking and your rationale there, because, as good as he was, how many years are left in the tank for Shaq Lawson compared to a Kingsley Jonathan, where he's just scratching the surface on what he can become at this pro level?
I mean, if you put all 4 of those guys in a bucket, Kingsley Jonathan, Shaq Lawson, AJ, and Boogie, I don't think any of the other 3 have as much juice and speed off the edge that Jonathan does. The bendability, the explosiveness. Now, a lot of his stuff, again, coming against second and third teamers. And the complicated part of this is like, all right, what do? Are you going to keep Kingsley Jonathan just to not dress him every week? Because he's probably not going to play. But if you do leave him out there, he is going to probably get claimed. So it's a situation where, like a couple years ago, they did the same thing with Cam Lewis, where they just, they kept him just because they didn't want anybody else to take him. It's a complicated one. And I think that, maybe you do it this way so you can kind of figure it out on the other end of the roster cut down day. And maybe Kingsley Jonathan ends up being somewhere else and going to practice squad or going somewhere else after the fact. I just think it could be in play here. And I agree with you. I think he's been as good of a player on that second and third team on defense as anybody at any position group.
Yeah, I just don't know where you're going to find a bucket that would fit all four of those guys, Matt.
Probably at Tops, right? You can find a
maybe at Tops.
You can find a bucket of savings at Tops, Ryan. A+ savings, in fact, back to school, hot off the grill. They got a great deal right now. Buy 2, get 3 free of the Pepsi product 6-pack bottles. Party size Lay's, Doritos, and Tostitos, $3.99 a bag. You can get yourself, eggs all of a sudden. You can get yourself a dozen medium eggs for 89 cents. I'm pretty sure eggs were like $7 or $8 a container a couple of months ago. They also got the $5 of cool cash. It's actually your last week to earn cool cash. All you have to do is head up to the counter at Tops, buy some of your favorite products, and you get 1 point for every $1 you spend on Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Polar, Gold Peak, Gatorade, Tim Hortons, so on and so forth. Where do you want to go next, Ryan?
Oh, well, let's go into your linebackers because there's been some complaints about the strength of this linebacker group.
Right. I think right now you're waiting for Terrell Bernard to get back to kind of take a look at this thing. I think right now, by default, Tyrell Dodson is your starting middle linebacker, but I feel like that's going to be a very short leash. I got to say, I went back and watched that game again. I got to give a little love to Tyrell Dodson. He's taking a lot of heat. I thought there were a couple of plays where he actually did well, especially in coverage. I think from a zone concept perspective, he's probably going to bring the highest level of football IQ to the position because he's been on task in this defense for so long that I think you could kind of roll him out there, hope for the best. I have the Bills cutting AJ Klein, which I know people probably first saw that and were like, wait, what's going on here? Like AJ Klein's like their top backup, maybe at middle linebacker and outside linebacker. It's okay. AJ Klein's 32 years old. He's been around the league, played for 4 teams last year, was a free agent into April. I think he wants to be here. So I think the situation is you cut AJ Klein, you put Bale Inspector, who's week to week with the hamstring, on injured reserve, and there you go. You bring him right back and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And with Spector being week to week, if he is someone that you want on this final 53-man roster, you put him on. Next day, you put him on the IR for 4 weeks, because as much as I've liked what I saw to Spector this summer, flying around like his hair was on fire, if you're someone that's categorized as week to week, you're not expected to have a huge role defensively out of the gate with this team. I think the IR for 4 weeks is a good spot for him. Let him heal up, get right, come back, and who knows what this linebacker room, what shape it'll be in after the first 4 weeks of the season, in terms of maybe needing Spector to play a little bit more, in terms of how Dodson performs or how Terrell Bernard performs if he's given a shot. So I think right now the way that you have things shaking out makes a lot of sense. AJ Klein, as you mentioned, was a free agent sitting there on the market for quite some time before the Bills brought him back. I don't see there being a lot of clamoring for a 32-year-old linebacker. I think Buffalo probably feels like they could let him go, bring him to the practice squad, and then kind of figure things out from there.
At CB, like I mentioned at the top, we cut Jamarcus Ingram and 7th round draft pick Alex Austin. I think he's a practice squad guy. They'll bring him back. Didn't do anything that really stood out. Saran Neal's been outstanding. It's amazing going back and watching that game again, how good he was. And we talked about him briefly on Saturday's episode, but it's worth mentioning again. I think he's really coming to his own. I mean, he's a really confident player. I think he's going to be a really important depth piece for him. When we talk about guys like Poona Ford and Leonard Floyd, like you got to add Saran Neal into that. Like he feels like a different version of himself. And I know you don't want to overreact to the preseason, but having that depth behind Taryn, who the last couple of years has been really healthy, and if you're a Bills fan, you knock on wood that continues, his elevated level of play in the slot, I think, is a huge deal. He looks really good in coverage, and that's a big piece of it too. Like sometimes maybe you want to mix him in against some of those tougher matchups. So a huge arrow up, if you will, for Saran Neal. Jamarcus Ingram, again, it's going to be a tough cut, but I have the Bills keeping 5 safeties, and I wouldn't have done it if not for the fact that, all right, you got the first bucket. We'll just stay on the bucket train, Ryan. Taylor Rapp, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, they're in their lock bucket, right? Then you have DeMar Hamlin in kind of that tweener spot where he's played a lot this summer. I feel like he's answered all the questions about whether or not he can play at a high level. I think he's looked at times really good. He's been in on tackles. Hasn't really factored in too much into any coverage situations, but I think for the most part, I think you give him an arrow up for the summer, and I think that he's locked in as safety 4. They really like Cam Lewis's versatility, though, and he can not only play safety, but he can do slot corner, he can do boundary corner. So I have them keeping him in the 53.
And I would do the exact same thing in terms of how you kind of slotted this out with the cornerbacks, with the safeties. Saran Neal also is arguably their best special teams player. So the fact that he also backed it up with his play on defense this summer only helps his case in terms of why he belongs here and still belongs here. In the safety room, DeMar Hamlin was outstanding in some of these preseason games. He was physical. He was attacking, the person that had the ball in their hand, whether it was coming in for run support, going after receivers on plays, whatever the case may be. He had a really strong summer, and he looks like he is ready to play meaningful football games. And then Cam Lewis, the fact that you can use him in so many different spots, the fact that there's always injuries in your secondary, you want to have that next man up mentality where you feel confident. And I think that you can feel confident in Cam Lewis in a few different spots, starting with behind Taron Johnson, like I said before. So for that reason, I love the addition of Cam Lewis to your projection.
I want to close with running back real quick, because I thought, man, if you want to take one single performance from the preseason and like elevate it to the top of the list, I think you could say Darrington Evans against the Bears was as good as it got in the Bills preseason. The problem is I couldn't find a spot for him on the roster. And, the Bills typically keep the 4 running backs. Then they go with Reggie Gilliam, who I kind of put in that bucket there. Excuse me. And we lean into bits on Shout, baby. We lean in. There's no problem with that. I love for the Bills to be able to keep Darrington Evans. I think that he runs hard. I think he hits the hole. I think he's aggressive. Even Ty Johnson, on a short week after just coming in, I thought had a couple of nice runs. Both guys, I think, in a perfect world, they can get them back on the practice squad. I think any combination of Evans, Mims, and Johnson could end up there.
Yeah, and I felt bad for Mims getting a concussion when he did, not being able to play in the final preseason game, because he did some nice things this summer during the preseason, during training camp. He's still someone that could be a practice squad, target for them. But Darrington Evans ended the preseason on a high note, breaking multiple tackles, eluding a few defenders before they could even get their hands on him on that 35-yard touchdown run. You find out after the game that he actually wasn't on the team flight. He did comment to a former player that had something to do with TSA not letting him on randomly, but then he was able to get on a plane in Buffalo, a commercial flight. So who knows what that was all about. But an interesting story for him to actually get to the game itself and then to perform the way that he did against one of his former teams is pretty awesome. Former 3rd-round pick. He stayed healthy all summer. So if I'm the Bills, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, he's definitely worth continuing to kind of work with on the practice squad if we can get him there. Because, again, running backs, I know the Bills are a pass-first team, but they take some hits, they take some blows. You might be down a guy before you know it, and it would be good to have someone with some experience playing in meaningful games, and Evans could kind of provide that for you.
Pops Mafia, have any other teams had a surprise cut yet? I'm not sure if it was a surprise cut, but shout out to the Shout Insiders. They mentioned this yesterday night in the chat to get our thoughts on what we thought about it. The Falcons released former 3rd-round pick from 2021, Jalen Mayfield. Been a Cody Ford kind of story for him in Atlanta. Started at tackle, they ended up moving him inside to guard, didn't work out, and they drafted Bergeron this year, and so they moved him back out. I believe it was Bergeron, back out to tackle, and it just didn't go well. He's been kind of moving all over the place, but he's definitely a guy that could be somebody that if I'm Brandon Beane, I'm very interested in.
Yeah, so It hasn't worked out yet, but maybe the Bills were high on him in the draft process. You could kind of point to him. I think some Patriots beat reporters were surprised when Carl Davis was released, a defensive tackle. Bills are pretty deep at that position. But there's been a few surprises. There will be some more, I think, on Tuesday specifically that will catch people off guard. So it's something to keep an eye on and monitor over these next 24 plus hours.
I could probably guess that Charles Nathan Peterman is not going to be a practice squad addition for the Bills, but listen, never say never. And Bobby Hart, if he doesn't end up back on this practice squad, what is wrong with this country? All right, he's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. That's going to do it for Shout. We'll be back on Wednesday night. We will have a full breakdown of where this roster is at, our thoughts on what will be the official roster probably by that point. We'll get into it. We'll have a lot of fun. That's what we do here on Shout. See you then, everybody.